Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation that I'm doing at Brighton SEO. Thought I'd do this version so that anybody that couldn't get to the conference was able to have a look at what we did. Firstly, a little bit about me and Majestic. Majestic, for those that don't know, is a specialist search engine. So just like the Googles of this world, Majestic crawls the internet. It's nothing to do with wine. Crawl the internet and indexes all the pages on the internet. But instead of looking at the content on the pages, we track the links and we make a map. So we reverse that. So instead of seeing all the links out of pages, what we show you is all the links into a web page by inverting the link graph of the internet. I used to be the marketing director of Majestic way back in the day. I'm still a global brand ambassador for Majestic, and now I have another business in links, and also have written a book called Entity SEO, Moving Search from Strings to Things. If you want to get that, then I'm sure you can find it at your local Amazon link. And I want to start with asking the question, who invented the hyperlink? So for the people in the audience, it's put your hand up time. Any suggestions for the people on the recording? Some people say it's Mozilla with Netscape. Some people say, that Steve Jobs wandered into Rank Xerox one day and saw a hyperlink on the screen. It might have been something to do with a mouse, but anyway. Some people say Tim Berners-Lee. These are sort of typical answers that people come up with. According to Wikipedia, it was Douglas Engelbart who did it in 1966. And then found that he could actually connect two documents together electronically in 1968. But the person that we're interested in is this guy. This is Desmond J. Sargent from the British Post Office in Felixstowe in 1980. And they filed actually in 1977 and got awarded a patent in 1980 for the hyperlink in the United States Patent Office. And that meant that the Post Office then later got sold on to British Telecom, BT, and it meant that BT thought that they had a patent on the hyperlink. So in the year 2000 to 2002, there was a fairly significant and important court case going on in the US because British Telecom thought they'd owned a hyperlink. So they sent out demands to all the top ISPs in the United States saying that they wanted royalties because all of those people's clients were using the hyperlink. And so they sent out bills. The largest of those was a company called Prodigy, who was the largest ISP at the time in the United States. And when Prodigy said no, they sued. British Telecom sued Prodigy, and there was a large 2-year court case. Now, the court case eventually didn't go British Telecom's way. Prodigy won, but it pretty much bankrupted Prodigy, it would appear, because that's not a name that I know now. Anyway, the court case failed, just for those that want to know, mostly on the grounds that the hyperlink in BT's patent was stored, the information was stored on a central computer, whereas the hyperlinks on the internet are distributed and there's no central store of that information. And there were a bunch of other ideas, but that was pretty much the best that I could find of the reasons that the judge throughout the case eventually. But it does go to show just how valuable hyperlinks must be. And this was, pretty much before Google became the god of search. So there is a lot of value in a hyperlink. So this presentation is about explaining some of those values that are beyond search engine optimization, because at the time, those links were not seen as something valuable for search engine optimization, because Google wasn't at that stage the market dominant force that it is now. So if you'd like a copy of the slides, you can email talk@dixonjones.com, and you can do that whether you're watching the recording or live. If you put Blink, that's Brighton link, Blink in the subject line, I'll know which set of slides to send through to you. So we just talked about court cases, and that right there gives a value for Bill. Bill is actually our US ambassador, and he's an SEO, but he makes a lot of money, or certainly makes money out of Majestic, not through link building in any way, shape, or form, but he makes that money out of being an expert witness at court cases. I would imagine the courts get wrapped up in knots with understanding the internet. It's not something that probably comes too quickly to judges or juries, and so Bill goes in there, gets paid to be an expert witness, and uses in backlink data to help him demonstrate facts about cyber squatting or domain names or even internet marketing in the courtroom. So therein lies an interesting use of link data. For example, you could be using it to say whether a business is established or whether it's a scam. It's all very well for a business to say that they've been in business for 20, 30 years, but for the last 20 years, people have been, having websites. So as soon as they start having websites, then they start to create an imprint, which, if it was being recorded, is not going to go away. So it's very hard for a new business to pretend that they're an old business. So if we have a look at myself, my own domain, I really had no impact on the world until around about 2012, 2013, and then I started to have an impact, and people started to pay attention to what I was saying, and then it seems that I stopped talking about things on my own domain around about 2015, 2016, and on the I only really started reblogging again back in 2021, 22, COVID, and no doubt when my book was coming out as well. So that's a pretty interesting history of that I've left behind. But what we can also do is then map that onto my time at Majestic. So just as I stopped blogging on DixonJones.com is the time that I started to build up Majestic's imprint on the world, and so you can see how they started to develop as a business from around about 2013 onwards. Although they were around before that, they I think had an initial product around about 2009-10, and then developed out as a business. Ultimately, moving on from there. In fact, that August 2010, Majestic.com was owned by a domain name squatter, frankly, who put a small website on there that was selling gym equipment, I think. Why he didn't sell wine, I don't know. Anyway, then we can also see that InLinks, which is my new business, if I tried to pretend that that business had been around since 2010, it would be clear that that would be a lie. The fact that we were doing some research on it many, many years before, it may be one thing, but frankly, we had nothing to show for it until around about 2019 when InLinks first had a website. So the point is that you can see that the backlinks history over time really stops a lot of scammers from being able to make much headway. You can't pretend that you've been around for a long time if there's no fingerprint in the world of backlinks. But you can also use backlinks to have a look at where businesses, particularly large businesses, are being proactive. So you can see which languages or which countries or which languages are linking through to any particular website. So you can either look at where they are geographically in the world, where the ISPs are based. So obviously, you don't have to have an ISP in your own country, but the majority of businesses tend to, in developed countries at least. But certainly languages. If the Japanese are going to be starting to link through large numbers to a particular website, that's an indication that business has made an indent on the Japanese market, or the Chinese market, or the German market, and so that's kind of interesting because there's a lot of businesses that have put a lot of advertising, say, into any particular market, but they may not have got traction in that market. So they may have disproportionately low amounts of links in those languages. So you can use links to get a world view of where a business is strong around the world. You can also use links to help decide how much a site or a business is worth. I'm not suggesting for a minute that you use anything apart from, audited accounts to evaluate a business. But ultimately, you can also get indications without having to look at accounts. You could just look at the number of backlinks and the backlink domains. This is a this is a Japanese website that is showing domain names, and they're just selling domain names, and they're showing the number of backlinks, and then they're also showing this evaluation of backlinks to say what the worth of this website is, because we all know that absolute numbers of backlinks doesn't really help. Maybe the number of referring domains will help a little bit, but if those domains are not valuable, then you need something that's a little bit more granular. But the source of that data is still backlinks that is now scintillated into a sort of PageRank-like algorithm to show the value of a web domain. So that's being used actively in Japan on this website to sell either links or domains. I'm not quite sure because my Japanese is not that good. We also use backlinks to show context. This is IBM and the anchor text links to IBM, and we can see just from this that IBM is not just about IBM, but it's also something about Vivissimo and something about Ustream and something about SQL, structured query language. So we get some idea in the backlink anchor text here, and we see stuff in Japanese and Chinese here as well. But the truth is that there is so much information in a backlink. There's so much context. If you think about a backlink from the reverse, when you're clicking on something, before you click on a web page, on a link on a web page, you probably have an idea of whether that content that you're going to go to is new or evergreen content, whether the person that's sending you there likes or dislikes that, whether it's a valuable site, whether it's a valuable piece of information, whether whether it's got powerful. There's all sorts of information that is intrinsically in that link. And that means that you can use links for other bits and pieces. So what we could do, for example, is use backlinks to give you keyword research ideas. And a way that you might do this is well, let's take the IBM example. If I take all the links for IBM and Oracle and Cisco and Intel and Red Hat, who I'd naturally consider competitors, I might get some very different research ideas than traditional keyword tools, for example, because I can compare those backlinks and have a look and see what kind of ideas are coming up when I put all those people together. So I can see, for example, that Cisco has got a lot of links around the concept of internet traffic, whereas IBM has a lot of information around data breaches, and then another one around online videos for Cisco. So these are quite different research ideas, and we start to see that these businesses that we might consider to be competitors tend to be focusing on quite distinct and different areas, and they're trying to differentiate themselves fairly effectively. We can also see the languages as well from this information. But for example, we see that Cisco's got a lot of stuff around online videos, and then we find that IBM acquired Ustream in 2016 for some $150 million. So they were obviously combining it with some other businesses. So they went into the video streaming market, which is kind of interesting because it would appear that Cisco were already there in some way, shape or form. So you can use it to drive or at least understand the differentiation between marketing, between big organizations and their marketing channels, or their product channels, if you like. So the fact that there's so much information there about in a web page from backlinks, I find it very, very helpful to have a Chrome plugin that's got backlink information for any web page, because it's a very quick way of working out whether a web page, in my opinion, is trustworthy, whether it's been around, what context it's in, what kind of people recommend this content. I find it's a very useful way to give myself this sanity check on whether what I'm looking at is of value to me and society as a whole. But you don't just have to use this for people, for websites. You can also use it for understanding a person's influence or their interests, or finding peers. So this is Kelvin Newman, as we all know, a person that runs the Brighton SEO conference, and so we can have a look at his link profile, if you like, on Twitter, to find out how influential he is as an individual and in what context he's influential as well. So I find that very, very interesting, that we can say, you know what, if he's influential in cycling, well, who else then is influential on Twitter in cycling? So we can sit there and have a look at all of the links that are coming in, that are around from web pages that are talking about the concept of cycling, and so we can see who these influencers are, and these are the people, if you wanted to promote your bicycle brand, for example, that I would approach, because these are your influencers, because they're not just influencers because they're saying things on Twitter, they're influencers because people are linking to them, to their Twitter profiles. And you can also use that information to find authors of a news site. So I put in Search Engine Journal here to have a look at who the authors are, and it's picked out all of the authors for Search Engine Journal. So if I wanted to get my name into Search Engine Journal, I would start to talk to these people, and there's at least 4 on there that I've met. 5, 6 on there that I've met on a personal level. So, one takeaway for you, links will never die. I do think that having access to a true link data source that plays with the information in a link gives you quite a lot of power and a new set of eyes in the world. I'm going to leave you with this quote, which I have left at a number of Brighton conferences, and I think it plays to links very well. Booker T. Washington said, "Associate yourself with people of good quality, for it's better to be alone than in bad company." And I think that's the way you should look at links. Thank you very much for your time.